Scathach, Dun Scaith, Albedo and her daughter Evie, Ruby, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Jean, Yggdrasil, Iella, Violet, and last but not least, Natalia, the big MVP of this situation. Looking at his beloved wife, the one he had entrusted with a crucial task, Victor let out a small smile when he saw the frown on her face. Before we start anything, I must say, darling, you are a crazy bastard. I thought I already knew that, but seeing your plan, I must make my opinion about you known and say that you are a crazy and suicidal bastard. Violet growled and spoke with sharp words. Do you not value your life? Do you want to leave me and my sisters widowed so soon? Do you want to leave your daughters without a father? Do you want to go buy milk and never come back? Is that it? Is that it? Victor continued to smile as if those sharp words didn't affect him at all since he knew she was just worried about him. Don't give me that sexy smile, you bastard. Don't you know how furious I am? I know, but you're going to help me anyway, right? Violet's momentum dropped, and she sighed. Yes. I wish I had another alternative, but no matter how far I look ahead, this is the only thing I can see working. If we go about this through normal means, we won't be prepared enough, and our enemies' numbers will eventually overwhelm us. Victor nodded. Even if he didn't use his visions of the future, he could easily predict the outcome simply by looking at the records of his wife's, Velnora's, former empire. In terms of numbers, Velnora had over 500x the number of Victor's current forces. Of course, their quality was questionable, and in terms of quality, Victor had more powerful beings. Victor didn't use his visions of the future, even though he had the same power as Violet. The reason before was that he didn't want to spoil it. However, after gaining authority, he realized that his mentality was naive, and thus, he decided to always use everything at his disposal. But his future visions often showed very far into the future. Victor didn't know what the problem was. He couldn't understand why he couldn't choose an exact time in the future to view like Violet did. His vision simply forced him to go to the distant future. It wasn't like that before, and Victor remembered that he could choose where to observe whenever he wanted. This proficiency also came from Adonis memories. But after becoming what he was today, his visions were only of the distant future that were often useless. After all, the future was constantly changing. The only theory he'd formed on why his power was reacting strangely was that it was caused by the level of influence he could exert and the weight of his existence in the universe. Not to belittle his wife or anything like that, but his existence was much more robust, heavy, and more potent than Violet's. Although, no matter what future I look at, an inevitable conflict with the light seems to be inevitable. Victor thought. A being that was blessed by positivity, Victor's counterpart. Again, Victor didn't take this as an absolute but rather as a reference. T was not good. To become paranoid like Zeus, Odin, and Kronos with future prophecies. Victor walked towards Violet and looked into her violet eyes. Are you okay? He asked. Yes. Violet sighed a little tiredly. We will survive, but everyone around us won't. Violet thought. She didn't look that far but did see 50 years after the invasion. What she saw said a lot about the state of the empire. They weren't losing. Victor was a powerful bastard. But they weren't winning either. Not even Victor, with his immense power, could be in several places at the same time. Not to mention that, in the upper sectors, there were enemies that were as strong as Victor. Well. He could, but he would need to release his eldritch god form. But by doing so, this entire universe would become his enemy. Violet sighed. She couldn't help but think about the visions she had. After all, it wasn't a concrete future, but just a possible one, most of which would probably never come to fruition now that they were following her husband's crazy plan. But the state of the empire which she'd seen in them had revealed a lot about the situation. No alliances were made with the factions of the upper sector. It was as if someone was playing under the table. A thought that was very strange. After all, Victor was the god of negativity, a being that all negative entities would want to form an alliance with. But even with this status, they had somehow remained isolated. Why? What's with the isolation? Was an alliance not possible? Suddenly, Violet paused. She noticed a common factor that she hadn't bothered to care about before. While searching through the possible futures, she finally realized what the deciding factor must have been. Most of the leaders who attacked us were men. I see. What was the most efficient form of alliance? Political marriage. Amaterasu, Ariel, and Tasha were examples of how political marriages could unite the factions. Darling will never offer his daughters up for a political marriage and would never restrict their freedoms. Violet now understood why these possible futures turned out this way. To be honest, she was happy. Yes, the empire did not progress as much as she would have expected, but so what? Victor did not change. He focused more on his family, protecting them from everything. Not to mention that as long as Victor was alive, this situation would eventually reverse itself. Victor was not a man who stayed on the losing side for long. History spoke volumes about that. Violet would bet good money that if she looked further ahead another 100 years after the barrier to the upper sectors opened, the situation would be completely different. But she didn't. The further she looked into the future, the more uncertain the future became. Remember my words, Violet. This power is a powerful weapon, but it is inconsistent. We will use it as a reference, but we do not depend on it. We create our own path, n/o/vel/b/jn.c//om. I know, darling, Violet sighed as her eyes stopped glowing violet, and the crown atop her head stopped spinning. She must use the future as a reference, not as a guide. She understood that very well. Now, coughing lightly to get everyone's attention, Hela spoke, "Can you please tell us why you called us here? I would also like to know. Knowing the Emperor, I know it will not be normal." The Heavenly Father, in his middle-aged appearance, spoke. "I would also like to know, Victor. What have you planned this time?" Scat-Hack spoke. And this left those who were not Victor's wives shocked. Realizing that not even Scat-Hack knew what this was about, they tried to look at the other wives. But they saw that not even they knew. The only ones who seemed to understand what was happening were Violet and Victor. "Violet, be a doll and explain it to them, would you? I'll go on ahead and make the necessary preparations." Violet restrained herself from rolling her eyes as the violet crown formed of her power floating on her head, glowing slightly due to her mood. However, it was quickly controlled using the power of order. The crown was a manifestation of her divinity. In her presence, all conflict would be avoided, and only the order that Violet wanted would prevail. Victor is planning to create a large mechanism that will encompass the entirety of Earth, as well as all the undeveloped planets that we have recently acquired. The purpose of this mechanism is to form what would essentially be a gargantuan hyperbolic time chamber that will isolate everything, making time within the chamber flow at a much faster rate compared to those outside of it. That way, we can speed up the progress of the Empire. With a significant enough time dilation, all of our population problems, administration problems, and pretty much everything that is currently unresolved will be solved naturally before the set deadline. Natalia added to Violet's explanation as she opened her eyes wide in disbelief. Not only that, but he will also be taking measures to cause the more rebellious gods in our empire to become more immortal in mind. By doing so, they will begin to live their lives with the expectations and mentalities similar to what you'd expect from a human. And with this change in mentality, we can be assured that their divine blood will be passed on, allowing for the birth of an abundance of demigods. These demigods will be the foundation for future gods, and when these more rebellious gods fulfill their role, they will die and reincarnate into the families of one of their descendants with no memories of who they once were, but with their divinity still intact, Violet explained. Victor clearly took the idea of the witch's home world but improved it to his liking. This way, he wouldn't have to deal with a group of gods who would always have rebellious thoughts in their heads, and he would also be introducing divine blood into the mortal population of his empire, making his citizens naturally stronger. In 1,000 years, more than half of the population would have divine blood flowing through their veins, consequently making them better versions of normal beings. This way, he will not only eliminate the rebels without having to deal with them, but he will also be creating loyal soldiers in the future who will know nothing that was not told to them, Scat-Hack spoke. How many years does Victor wish for the empire to remain within the dilation? Natalia asked cautiously. 100,000 years. Impossible. The amount of energy that would be required for such an endeavor is absolutely abysmal. Even Victor would not be able to handle it without suffering the consequences. Ruby couldn't help but scream. She now understood why Violet called him a crazy bastard. Natalia couldn't help but nod her head. This kind of mechanism would go against the very foundations of the universe. It would be as if they were a little fish swimming against the current that was the river of time. If it were just that, it would be more straightforward. What he was actually trying to do was form artificial islands in this river that were constantly moving, and it was not just one island, but several of them on a scale that encompassed the entire galaxy. All of Victor's wives present here understood this. They were very familiar with how time worked due to lessons from Natalia and Victor themselves. Which is why I called Jean for assistance. Among our group, she possesses the largest energy reserves by far, and she will greatly ease Victor's burden. Violet said while thinking internally. She honestly might even have more energy than Victor himself. Jean was not the guardian of the universal tree for nothing. She was directly connected to one of the primordial forces of the universe. Scat-Hack, Dunscaith, Albedo, Evie, Ruby, and Hephaestus will be focused on ensuring that the mechanism functions like a large blanket that will isolate the necessary targets throughout our galaxy. The development of the other galaxies in our possession will occur naturally in the future when our numbers are high enough. The crown floating above Violet's head began to shine and spin slightly. Ugh. The aforementioned individuals placed their hands on their heads as they received numerous pieces of information about discoveries they themselves had made, or more accurately, discoveries their future selves had made. This was fragmentary information that Violet had acquired by observing as she had not interacted with them directly. However, these pieces of information would give them ideas about what they were planning to do and how to accomplish it. Aphrodite will ensure that the beings of our empire are more fertile to guarantee an increase in the population, while Yggdrasil, as the one who will be most affected, will remain here for observation so that, in case of any unforeseen consequences, adjustments can be made.